the title seems to say like really doing a lot, okay? But really I'm just going to be touching on one small project in Honduras, one small project in Cameroon, and one small project in Guatemala. But I do believe that there were some lessons learned in those projects that I want to bring to you. And you know, I speak from my personal experiences. I'm sure any number of you may have had other experiences in the global water and sanitation setting, but I just want to share some of my personal experiences, and more specifically as a professional mentor in the University of Pennsylvania chapter of Engineers Without Borders. So I will speak to some of the challenges of effective water development. These are examples from Honduras, where is actually where I grew up, and Cameroon, where we've been working for a few years now, and Guatemala, which we just recently returned from a project there. And the nature of Engineers Without Borders projects is that we kind of selected to be simple and manageable. But if any of you have worked across cultural boundaries, there's inherent complexities involved in working this. So even though you can pick as simple and as manageable a project as you can possibly foresee, once you get on the ground, things are not as they seem. But in spite of that, even though each project and problem is unique, I believe that there are lessons learned that can inform our global engagement. Now, I suppose that some of you who are here are very interested in global water and sanitation issues, but there may be others of you who's like, oh, well, I'm coming for the lecture series. Not sure what there is in this for me. I think that these lessons learned do have impact on the way we do our work even here in the U.S. And that's what I tell my students when I try to bring some of my global experiences into the classroom. So we're looking a little bit at the Engineers Without Borders model. I don't have time to explain a lot of what Engineers Without Borders does. I probably should have included a slide with web pages, but you can Google Engineers Without Borders, and you can Google Philadelphia Global Water Initiative, and you will go right to their web page. But Engineers Without Borders tends to often work, although they do have professional chapters, often work with student chapters. Students work on a problem that a community has asked them to work on. They go to the community, work with the community, often with a partner organization, and try to solve that problem. And so obviously there's a lot of opportunities. For the communities, they benefit from shared resources that comes from maybe outside of the community. They might not have enough. And students, of course, benefit from the global engagement in a cross-cultural setting. But in spite of that, those benefits and opportunities, there's really different goals. You know, the community may want to improve their health by having a sustainable water and sanitation system. I am going to be speaking mostly to water today. And then with the students, they're interested in a global education. So those goals aren't necessarily in the same direction. But how can those be brought together for a positive outcome? And water supply is actually a pretty good type of project to choose for those things. The projects are often simple and manageable, and the community readily sees the benefit that they can obtain from working on a project like that. But there is one caveat, and I think if you read the paragraph associated with this talk, you probably saw that. Successful water projects are often more dependent on social rather than technical design. And that's, okay, I need to see, how many engineers do we have? Okay. There's a few of you. That's sometimes hard to grasp. And those of you who are not engineers and have to work with engineers sometimes, you probably like to beat that over the engineer's head. But, and certainly a lot of you who are studying in the environmental studies program and are very interested in policy, you realize that the social aspect is extremely important. But then sometimes the technical aspect is left behind. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some situations that kind of bring those together. So the 3 countries, 3 projects, did a spring protection in Honduras, and the challenge was to take water from this mountainside, get it over a couple mountains, and about 3 miles of pipeline over to the community that was over here. And in Cameroon, we had a village that was divided into 2. We had the upper village and a lower village. The lower village is quite easy to get water to. The upper village is more of a challenge. And in Guatemala, where we just came back this past August, the farmers on the steep ridges wanted irrigation water. So they already had their water supply. But there's a question of elevation and location. So let's look at those together. So when Untitled Honduras actually started back in 2006, which sounds like quite a while ago. That was my first project working with Engineers Without Borders. And we had a government map that had been put together, and we were doing our darndest to try to make it match what we were measuring in the field. So Telitos had a village which was in the lower part of the screen here. This is the village here. And 3 miles away was their spring that they had identified. Somehow they knew that that spring was higher than where they were, and they figured that water could flow downhill to where they were at. A government survey had been undertaken, and it seemed to show that that was going to be all right. But when we started measuring things, some north arrows were messed around, and the community had already gotten frustrated with the government survey because the government was telling them, look, it's too expensive to do this. We need to use our money, and probably rightly so, to help other communities. If we could help 3 communities for the price that it takes to help yours. So that's why we're not going to go any further on this. So the challenge I soon found out was, could I really get the water there and be sure before we took 14 students down to work on this project? And can you hear me on the back when I do this? Yes? I don't know how many of you are into topographic maps, but this is a mountain ridge here, a high point. Okay? This is the valley, this is the low point. And depending on whether we could cross the mountain here or whether we had to go all the way around because this was too high, was going to add a lot of pipeline to our project. So that was part of the challenge. So about a week before we left, I chickened out, and I called, and here's, looking from our village, this is the ridge here that we had to come around. Okay? I called as I said, I had grown up in Honduras, and I was there with my family from 2002 to 2005. I knew an engineering company there, and I said, look, could you do a survey for us to get this nailed down? And he said, sure. So they brought out their GPS backpacks, and did, state-of-the-art survey for us. Because the very first day when we arrived, they said, we're not sure that the spring is high enough to get the water around the mountain. And we had just arrived. I was like, oh, now what do I do? But we said, well, let's see if we can, what we can do to check again. And we went up to the spring location with the village and students and excavated the spring. Basically, when see the spring coming out of the ground. Often if it's on a hillside, you can kind of chase that spring up. And so we chased it up. We were able to gain 10 meters or 30 feet. Okay, so gave us a little bit more margin for error. The spring, where we were going to tap the spring was actually 30 feet higher than what we originally thought. So that gave us a little bit more. So I told the surveyors, I said, okay, start with this new location and give me a 0.5% slope, all right? And stake it out, go around all the mountains, and this is like steep up and down, so we can find out where to put the pipeline so we're going to be okay. So they started doing that. We began to work on our spring, and it was, we built up the wall that you can see here, and then connected the pipes into a collection box, and we were on our way. So let me just go back through some of the steps for you, because like I said, here was a technical challenge of could we get the water over the mountain, pretty much. But all of the other pieces had to be in place. The social pieces had to be in place. So I just wanted to show you a chronology of some of the roles that were played. So the community, before we ever heard about them, had already purchased the spring location and paid at least something for the government survey that was done. And then they prepared an application with a partner NGO, which is a non-governmental organization. We call a nonprofit here, and is very important to having people on the ground to understand what's going on. And then all together, PEN, Engineers Without Borders, partner NGO, community, and like I said, I brought in this national consulting engineer to build the spring protection, do the pipe crossing, and check the survey. And we only got the spring protection built, and then the community had to continue laying the pipe. So before we left, I told the community, and I don't know if you've ever played at home like this, but if you take your garden hose and you don't have much pressure, you lift it up higher, the water starts flowing less. You put it down lower, the water starts flowing faster. All right, so basically that's what I told them to do. As you proceed from the spring protection and you start following these stakes, I said, before you permanently lay the pipe in the trench, I want you to, at the end of the day, kind of connect the hose up to the pipe and do the, the up and down treatment, to see where the water cuts off, where it flows. So they did that after we had left and everything like that. And what they did is they found that even though the survey crew, I'm going to go back a little bit, the survey crew, when they started here and went around there, they decided it had to come around this way. All right? The local folks with the garden hose method figured out that they could come across right here. There's a little bit of a saddle in the ridge where they could come across. So they saved about 500 meters, almost well over half mile of not quite half mile, about a third of a mile of pipe to come around that. So I heard that they made it across, and it wasn't until this was in May that we had started the work. We came back in October. I went and I checked. There was a stake with an elevation right here, and I checked. And they had basically narrowed the slope between this point and this point to 3%. I'm sorry, 0.003, 3%, which is too narrow of a margin for me to design for. I just would not have felt comfortable that I had all my calculations right to do that. But them physically doing it by hand, so they were kind of upset with us paying the engineers to do the work anyway. So in the end, I told them, okay, you guys really are the best engineers. You figured out how to get the water, and that water is still flowing. we came back in October and said, okay, we need a bigger storage tank. And at this point, the community's trust with the government wasn't that great. But we said, look, we're not here to help you build a tank. You need to get back together with the government and figure out how you're going to do this. We can supply, some of the money for the materials, since the government had already been had neglected to provide funds for that. So they went and they got a government contractor and built this beautiful tank in a way that was standard for Honduras, was well understood, and so we were able to combine partners from all aspects to come up with a solution. So this tank was built for the water system, and then later on, just to show you how this thing progresses, once you have a little bit of success in a community with community development, came back and did the sanitation assessment, did 4 flush latrines, which is like a small toilet, and from day one, the community wanted help with electrification. They wanted electricity in their community from day one. Okay, you see Occupy, I'm not going to make any political statements today, but you see Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Philadelphia, and you get a protest. Well, in Honduras, when you need something really bad, the way you protest is you block a road. And the police and the military will let you block for a while, and then they'll crack heads together and say, move on. Well, the main leader of this community blocked a road to get electricity to his town. And he had the scars on his head to show for it. He literally got beat up for electricity. I don't know anybody that's gotten beat up for electricity, but he did, and they now have electricity in their town. So it's just amazing how community leadership and unity can be an important thing. And finally, for Honduras, we had proposed an independent evaluation. We're trying to figure out who to link up to do that. It never happened, but my colleague, another professional mentor, was able to visit this past August, and the community is maintaining the system. They built this beautiful chain link fence around the source, and they've planted trees, and everything's working. It's just amazing what they've done. So we counted it a success, but the success is small on our part. It's really the community's success. Right. Jump across the ocean to Cameroon. We first went to Cameroon, and I'm starting to lose my dates here, but I think it was 2008. And there were a couple things that I wanted to point out about Cameroon for these pictures, and then I'm going to talk about a particular village. Very culturally rich. This is at a death ceremony. You can see the dancers having different kinds of costumes. This is our first EWB group that went in the wintertime. You can have a design for a spring box, nice and square and everything like that. But, when it comes time to build the box, you got to make it fit. All right? So you got to be flexible in your design. That's the way the technology needs to be adaptable. And then in the end, of course, we're happy when the water comes out of the tap. So our first project was in Cope and Tudig, and then we went on the other side of the mountain to a village called Gundo. And as I said before, a very, very rich culture. I mean, I think every culture is rich in its own way, but this one was rich in an obvious way. It's just a lot of visual things and a lot of mores and customs related to the village chief that you kind of had to, you're not supposed to look the chief in the eye, and you don't really shake hands with him, and he talks through an intermediary generally, and other things like that. So the chief is living in the upper portion of the village on the top of the mountain, and most of the village is halfway down the mountain. Okay, all of these are up in the mountain, and so that presented its own challenges. The chief had as those of you who have a little bit of geology background, you don't want to expect a very large spring at the top of the mountain. There's not much of a catchment for the water to collect for a spring. So the spring at the top of the mountain was quite small, but it did last throughout the year, and then the one on in the middle of the mountain had quite a bit more flow. Can you see the green lines here in the back? All right, good. All right, this is my little hand sketch on top of the Google Earth image. I was trying to overlay contour lines, and I'm kind of technically challenged sometimes to do everything. But if you give me some elevations, I can draw contour lines, as some of my former students can attest that I make them do sometimes. So here I'm drawing the contour lines. So this is the side of the mountain, and we have a spring right here, and the main areas that we want to send the pipeline to are out here. And then at the top of the mountain, the chief is here, and the spring is way over here. And so if you can see this contour, this is 1,600 meters, I believe, and this contour here is like 1,500 and something. So water's not going to flow uphill. So we had to try to decide to say, okay, well, we can protect the spring and maybe collect more water so it's a more suitable resource, but do we really want to get into figuring out how to pump it up to the chief's house? So that we were kind of in limbo about that. So we started work on the lower spring. Village came out in big force. We chased the water up, as we do, up to a palm tree that is well known for being near water sources. And it didn't take long until we had a tap with flowing water. But even as we're doing this, we have this undercurrent of, you know what, if we don't work up on the hill, we're going to be in trouble. We got to spend as much time up there as we do down here where it's easy. And I'm talking about harder because even though there was a truck that brought sand to the lower spring, there's no truck that could get up to the higher spring. So we had to carry sand, cement. The rocks were already there. They had to be broken all the way up the hill. So the community needed to do this. So this is a challenge in any number of ways. But as far as protecting the spring, no problem. As far as laying pipe, if indeed they ever came up with a pump, would be no problem. But I still remember sitting down with the chief, trying not to look him in the eye and have his representative talk to me and say, we can find a pump. We're not going to go bring something from the US of A or, go hunting around every little place in the capital to try to find something for you. We want to find something in the next city over, and it's going to be a hand pump that works something like this. And we just said, I did my calculations. I said, in order for you to have enough water at your compound to use for all purposes, you're going to have to be pumping for 4 or 5 hours a day. And I said, I don't think anybody wants to do that. The chief said, we need a pump. And I said, all right, well, we'll see if we can find one of those, but I'm telling you, it's going to be a problem. And then I was concerned because I didn't know how the chief treated his people, if he was going to, have forced labor to pump water for his compound, or what he was going to do. So it languished a little bit. We didn't actually get that portion installed. We had left it with one of the technical people that we thought was capable. In that case, it didn't work out. Well, as it turns out, we really should have focused on how to solve that particular problem and then let people live with the result. If that's what they decided to do, then we should have just installed it with them and then let them figure out how to do it. But instead, we left it go, and then sometime later, the chief died. And then we got news of that and said, ooh, that is not good. He passed away, suddenly. And so, I don't know how many of you have been to Africa. When the chief dies, you invite a lot of people, and you have, you're supposed to have food and water for them. So, we understood that the memorial time funeral wasn't going to happen for quite a while. So get that pump and those pipes fixed in time for the big meeting. And that part did happen. And sure enough, we did hear later that it was really hard pumping. So in the end, I think the best we could do was tell the people, said, look, probably the best is to be able to pump water for drinking and cooking, and then if you're going to wash clothes and other things, go down to the spring. It wasn't really that far. Go down to the spring and do your other water needs there, and just only pump enough water for. Or if you're having a big meeting occasion, then I'll go ahead, pump for a couple days, fill the tank, and do all of that. But it was just an interesting challenge that because we weren't, with our Western minds, we weren't quite as attentive to that need and desire. There was actually some divisions in the community that resulted before the chief passed away, and we said, we really need to step up and fix that particular issue. So here is yours truly at there was a small spring protection there. We were able to get a lot more water by going upstream farther and clearing the area, and then this is the chief's compound. The chief himself wouldn't come out for a photograph, but this is the chief's representative, and yours truly with the trying to wear the honorable clothes that people gave me. But again, we just realized how important it is to be conscious of those things, even though the technical solution may seem quite obvious. Now, we could have just put in a solar pump or some kind of generator pump, but then that probably would not have been sustainable. But at least the piping's there that if at some future date that does become sustainable, they can do that. And another lesson learned in Cameroon is, you can put words together and they make sense in their own way. Patience express. So if you have patience, you might just get there going faster than you thought you would. This is the way I interpret it. Sorry, I need to have a blank slide. All right, jumping over to Guatemala. Here we had a village of 60 families high above Lake Atitlan, a volcanic caldera, formed about 80,000 years ago, which ain't much in geologic terms. They already had a water system, but they wanted an irrigation system so that they have a dry season of several months where they would not be able to produce anything, and they wanted to be able to grow vegetables. And then there's a beautiful lake. I'm not going to give you a lot of pictures of that, but you just Google Lake Atitlan and you'll see kinds of beautiful pictures. So there are tourists around down below, not really in this village. And so if they could grow specialty crops for restaurants, I don't know, arugula or something like that, then they could have a bit of a cash crop. And we were there in August, which is kind of rainy season, so we saw water everywhere. You're going to laugh when you see some water flowing in the mist, like coming up the mountain. All right, water was plentiful, but not at the elevations that we need to serve everybody. And another issue is that even though there were a number of different springs, land ownership was very sensitive. They'd just gotten out of the Civil War just a decade or so, 96, not that long ago. And so land, you didn't want to be, as a foreigner, be kind of stepping on people's toes when it came to ownership of land, because people had been cheated out of their lands historically, well, for all of their history. So we tried to be sensitive to that as well. So there's a little bit of the lake. This is a typical cornfield. You can stand at one plant and you can reach out and touch the other plant. And if you fall out of your cornfield, it's over. Okay? And this is not the steepest I saw either. But you can see there's a pretty good gradient there. Can't tell who's walking there, but there's a bit of a path there. That's actually the path for one of our irrigation. It was actually the town's, the village's water supply and irrigation pipeline. So in our motivation to serve as many farmers' plots as we could, we went trekking. And I really, really thought I was going to lose a student. All right? There was at one point, it was like, we really should turn back. But turning back was worse than going forward. So you see that rock slide there? I think this was all a rock slide too. It was just covered with vegetation. And that's what we were walking along to get to that rock slide. So they actually thought that we could build a spring box right here and take the water to go to where we wanted to go. And I said, I don't know. That's a cliff, and if the rock slide comes, it's going to take everything out. And then you can see the gentleman looking at another cliff. I love the look on their faces because I don't know what anybody said. But that's about the way I was looking at that cliff in terms of how we would do a spring protection there. So we had to abandon this site, and we went to another site that was already being used by others, and we approached them and said, look, if we do this properly and build a tank, there should be enough water for everybody. So they went and they talked to the owner of that, and they talked and they talked. Well, 2 days later, we found out that the owner had talked to his brothers, and they wanted $20,000 for it. So we weren't sure if it was our presence or if that was just a very strong way of saying no. Probably a little bit of both. And some of the community members were quite discouraged because we hadn't actually sat down and went over all the engineering reasons why that wasn't even going to serve everybody. But we did, with one of the supplies, which the town was already using and using the overflow, we were able to supply quite a number of families, and here we are surveying with an AMI level where the pipeline should go, and we rolled out the pipe rolls. You can see the students here. Back to the steep cornfield, laying the pipe. Linford, my colleague, and some students are connecting some rolls of pipe. And then we sat down for a community meeting. And I'm putting this slide here for 2 reasons. So I've already talked plenty about the technical challenges, the social challenges, knowing what's going on, and who owns what, and what can you do. Can you force people to share certain things or not, or how do you build confidence? In Guatemala, the indigenous people don't really speak that much Spanish. So we were able to communicate with, we had one interpreter who was there most of the time, but the men would be able to communicate with the men in Spanish to some degree, but you were never quite sure if you were getting through and you were getting language back. But the women would just kind of smile at you and you couldn't really have a conversation. So we did manage, they were making tortillas for every day, so we did manage to get some students to kind of hang out in their homes and learn to do tortillas. I don't know how much of a relationship builder this was, but at least it was an attempt to get closer. So anyway, nobody could find chalk for the little blackboard we had, so I ended up taping some pieces of cardboard together and going with my magic marker. And we sketched out the system. And so one of the things that we proposed, this village had electricity. One of the things that we proposed is, look, there's a portion of your plots are right next to the corner of the village where there is electricity. What do you say about us just buying a simple little electric pump, and we can pump it up and then feed it by gravity to these couple little plots that are above everything else? And they said, no. Not really, it just won't work. The group just said, no, it won't work. Was electricity too expensive? What was it? So then we said, well, are there any other water sources up in the mountain that would be available for us? And these are for the higher plots. And they said, well, there is one, but only 6 people can get water from it. So we said, well, we've got to work with what we have. So we did go up to that location. could climb more than 1,000 feet. This is the village down here. We're up here, and here's the little spring. And I just got word a week ago that the larger spring and that this spring have been completed. We were well on our way to finishing the first spring. You can see these pipes. These are for the public water system and the overflow. And what we did is we took the overflow from the public system and put it into the spring box to serve as water for the farmers. Now we had to be careful because some of the farmers said, well, why don't you just tap your pipe right into the public water system? And we knew that could bring problems later on, because then if there was ever a problem with the water system, it would be like, you farmers are stealing the water. So we said, let's make it to the overflow. And sure enough, wouldn't you know it, when the farmers were digging some of the line for the irrigation pipe, they put a hole in the public pipe. And actually, it came back on us because the water served most of the village except for about 6 houses right where we were staying. So we went two and a half days without water. I don't think most of the students were showering anyway, but as much as they should have anyway. We had one shower that worked and one that didn't really work between 14 of us, 15 of us. So we were able to direct the water into this box, and then we were able to test it. We had sufficient pressure at our first tap. So the farmers could hook up their irrigation hoses straight to these taps and have water irrigate. And we're planning to go back in January, see how that all worked out, and hopefully build up the confidence of the trust of the village enough that we can talk about other community-wide projects to work on, like sanitation. All right, so let me just review a couple things, and then I'll take some questions. For these kind of projects to be successful, I just want to review a couple of things that are needed. Initially, you need a partner, especially for an Engineers Without Borders project. You need someone on the ground who knows what's going on. It's kind of interesting in one way. I grew up in Honduras, and I lived with my family there for 3 years, and I worked on community development projects. And being there for 3 years, some of that stuff was more challenging than I actually had on this last little one where we went for 1 week, and that's because that other organization was just so good at working with us. But someone needs to be on the ground knowing what's going on. And it needs to be small enough to be understood and designed by students, and also understood by community as well. And the community needs to feel ownership of the project and contribute resources. And it needs to be a significant contribution. Like Engineers Without Borders is realizing that just doing sweat equity, isn't enough. That you also need a financial contribution so that people, realize that there's money involved to maintain and other things like that. In preparation, you need to make an assessment trip to understand the design constraints, begin a relationship. For the Guatemala trip, the assessment trip was only a day and a half in the village, and that was too short. That's why we found out a lot of things that we didn't know about before. We often work with a memo of understanding to kind of like put on paper what our understanding of our roles and commitments. Communities often say, well, yeah, show me where to sign and I'll sign. It's sometimes a memo of understanding is a little bit like when you download new software, you read. So, okay, but if you actually discuss it through, it helps the community work through at least what your perceptions are of what's going on. And leadership is huge. Unfortunately, you can't pick the leaders, and so when a village has good leadership, it really comes through, and when they don't, then there's other issues. And students get to learn about cultural context. During implementation, you need the support of that partner organization. It's helpful if students can be hosted in the community, so you get more interaction. We actually stayed in a community center, and then the community was bringing us our meals, and we wished to daily communication. My colleague, actually we're not supposed, don't tell anybody, we're not supposed to drive vehicles when we're there, but we needed some materials really bad. So they had a pickup there for emergencies. So he took the pickup with 2 students and he went out down to the main town to buy some materials. On the way back, the heavens opened up and it rained like crazy. So there was a landslide and it blocked him. He couldn't get around the landslide. And some people in the community had cell phones, and I kept trying to reach him. I wasn't getting through. I didn't know, I knew it's supposed to be back after dark, before dark, because there's bandits that come and can rob you and stuff. And he wasn't coming back, and I was getting kind of worried. Well, when they finally did show up, I said, "Oh yeah, we were talking to the community." So there were community members who actually knew that what had happened and knew that he was okay, and they just taken the long way around, but they failed to communicate to us. So we got the other end of the non-communication deal. So these project-wise, communication is huge, and we need to make every effort. We've also learned that part of the communication is just talking about the technical design aspects frequently so that it's understood at every step of the way. And then follow-up, the partner organization can provide technical oversight, students can provide feedback, and I preached this but haven't really done it. Look for some kind of independent evaluation of the project, because if you ask me how the project was, I'm going to try to look on the good side. If you ask the community, they may even try to tell you what they think you want to hear. So you kind of need someone who can kind of evaluate that's not vested in that. So what are the lessons learned? In Teneritos, I think hands-on local knowledge is huge, and in many ways it trumps engineering design based on modern GPS topographic survey, and those leadership is key as well for long-term sustainability. And Gundam, got to pay attention to concerned waves. We were hearing undercurrents from village leaders, but we weren't giving it as much, it's like, oh, well, they can sort that out. And it was later that we realized that there's more to it. So you can, like I said, we tried to talk about argue technological constraints, but people need to try for themselves to some degree. Bahomel communication was difficult, and it was a bit of an obstacle, both in terms of getting there first. And, I could say, that spring there can supply everybody. But if the social issues haven't been worked out, that would be a technological solution that wasn't technically appropriate, but not socially feasible. And finally, and forgive me if you've seen the slide before, globally it's important to be flexible in your thinking, like being able to recognize that there's a hybrid when you see one. Well, thank you. I can take any questions or clarifications.